In today's video, you will see the worst swirl marks and scratches I've ever seen on a Ferrari, including some head-scratching, ridiculous defects. But most importantly, you'll see one of the worst paint protection film jobs that I've ever seen in my entire career. Jobs like this is why I started doing PPF, and today I'm going to put 10 plus years of my detailing knowledge to work and fix everything. My goal is simple: make this the best looking 458 Speciale in the world. And I know what you're thinking.
I'd like it tasting.
Do you get deja vu when she's with you? Do you get deja vu when she's with you? Do you get deja vu?
Oh, that's pain in my chest. I still wish you the best. Oh, that's pain in my chest. Oh, that's pain in my chest.
Do you get deja vu?
I'm like pain in my chest. I'm like I can't afford a Ferrari, but this don't mean I can't get you there. I guess she's in Xbox and I'm more Atari. But the way you came in there, I picture falling in love with you. She's like, oh, well, you should know. I got some news for you. Yeah, gonna tell you no more.
You might notice there's actually two 458s in this trailer, and there's a 458 and then there's a 458 Speciale, which is the one in this particular video we're going to focus on, but I will show a little bit of both cars throughout the video. The 458 especially sounded amazing because of the aftermarket exhaust. When the cars were started and backed off the trailer, I did notice that,
To be honest with you, that smells like pure gasoline.
this is pretty common on any aftermarket exhaust supercar. The detail you're about to see is a culmination of a decade of my OCD running on 16-hour days, 365 days a year. Naturally, this attracts the ultimate car enthusiasts who are passionate about making a new or used car perfect without exception. Take this Ferrari owner, for example. He purchased the car from Canada and imported it to America simply because this was literally his perfect spec. The car had a km/h dash. To make it legal in the United States, he literally had to send the car to a Ferrari dealership and have the entire dashboard pulled and replaced with a mph dashboard. When the car is off the trailer and under my lights, the first thing I do is get up close and really inspect everything. I mean, I really get in there and check everything, kind of like this. Yep, literally just like that. And what I found was awful. Like literally one of the worst installs I've ever seen. It had every kind of defect and problem and thing that could go wrong with the PPF, and the paint itself was awful, and it was just super, super bad. And that's really a travesty, considering how rare and special this car is. I mean, I found everything, like virtually nothing tucked.
Right to jail.
Huge relief cuts.
Right to jail. Right away.
Dust.
Believe it or not, jail.
Stretch lines.
Jail.
And film peeling in multiple locations.
Also jail.
And cut marks on the normal 458.
Believe it or not, jail. Right away.
Stay tuned for the next part of the video coming up about paint correction, where we'll talk even more about some of the really, really nasty stuff that was actually in the paint that required paint correction. This is really hard to show on camera, but there's literally nothing in protection where my finger is right here. Then there's kind of nothing. This like entire valley right here, there's no film through this entire piece. All right, it's really hard to show this on camera, but there's a relief cut that goes from there and like from here. And it's pretty large, like my finger is on the tip of it, and then the other, so it's like, it's about 3 fingers wide, and then it goes to about 2 fingers through here, 2 finger, and then about 1 finger where my pointer finger is, and that's where the tip is. So this whole section has a relief. Then I'm definitely going to try and do this with no relief. It might not be possible, but we're going to try it. But the way that like these are cut in here is an abomination. And I don't know what the hell happened. So there are seams everywhere. So this is a piece that comes in here. This comes up here. This and this are 2 different pieces. This right here is one solid piece. This is the exact same geometry as this fender, but they have a relief cut in that. no explanation as to why you would do that if you didn't do it there, but whatever. They didn't even like try and wrap this into the door jamb, so the edge is like where my fingernail is, when like they should have jumped into here, right? They should have went like the other like 4 millimeters up into the door jamb. Here are a couple quick pictures from the 458 of a lot of things that were wrong. There's way more wrong with this car than what I showed, but this was some of the worst, including this section, which is, there's just so much wrong in this photo that it's almost hard to comprehend. But yeah, very, very bad stuff on this car as well. The two main ways to remove paint protection film are with a heat gun and with a steamer. A heat gun works pretty well, but a steamer is going to be, in my opinion, a little more efficient. PPF removal is unfortunately very hard on your body and on your hands. You literally end up kind of losing some of the skin on your fingertips at the end of doing this process, which is unfortunate and very painful. I tried to wear gloves this time to kind of help with that, but honestly, it still happened, and then I just had to take the gloves off later on in the video. You can kind of see, even though this is time-lapse and sped up so much, it just takes a really long time, and the adhesive is still pretty strong, so it just kind of beats your hands up as you're doing this slowly and methodically, which is the safest way to do it to avoid lots of adhesive. Let's talk about pulling paint, the topic that no one wants to talk about when they do PPF. The reality is it's very rare, it's very uncommon, but it can happen. The question you should be asking is, why does it happen? It happens when cars are repainted and then new PPF is put on that painted car too quickly, like say a week or two afterwards. That's almost guaranteed to cause problems. You need to let new paint cure for a minimum of 30 to 60 days. Some shops even say 90 days. If you wait the proper amount of time for the paint to gas out and then you do PPF, the future removal should be seamless with no problems. The other problem is going to be when the panel is just painted improperly or it is not prepped correctly. In these situations, no matter what happens and no matter how long you let the paint gas out, you're likely going to experience an issue when the PPF is removed. These are the cars where someone removes the film and 3 feet of paint comes off with it. This is a paint process issue, not a removal issue. The only time it can technically be the detailer's fault would be, for example, if there was a really bad rock chip that was already there and then someone PPF'd over it. When you're removing the film in that area where the chip is, you need to be really, really careful and be really slowly pulling the film in that spot because the paint might be kind of weak. If the car was brand new and a rock chip happened to the film that went through it, same situation. The paint in that area might be weak. You need to remove very slowly and use a lot of steam in that spot to really soften the glue before you pull it off. No matter what you do and how good you do it, there's typically going to be some adhesive. If you run into some serious problems and there's lots of adhesive, a lot of people attack that different ways. Many people use plastic razor blades. Sometimes that is necessary and helpful, but some people just don't know how to use them, and you can cause very serious problems with those very quickly. Mostly because as you're removing all that adhesive, you really can't see what's happening underneath it, so you don't realize that you scratched it until you actually clean and wash the car after you've done that adhesive removal process. My number one recommendation, again, to all the installers out there who might be learning or are relatively new to this, is once you get all the film off and you have that leftover removal, you're going to use an adhesive remover. Something like Geon Tar is what I personally use. I hose the car down in that, let it soak for a very long time, and then I'll use a pressure washer and pressure wash everything off to the best of my ability. I have been in the situation before where I have had to fix other people's mistakes because they did something like that with a plastic razor blade, and I've needed to wet sand out pretty bad scratches from other people. When I put the price of a detail in the thumbnail of a video,
well, then everyone loses their minds.
But wait until you get the bill for having someone screw up the majority of the panels on your car during a PPF removal process. That's going to be way more than the cost of the shipping to send the car to me, and my pricing is usually pretty comparable to most people considering the level of work that we're offering here. Generally speaking, if you own a car that's doubling in value, tripling in value, or you just know is going to appreciate over time exponentially, do not screw around with any of the stuff that I just spoke about. Saving a few $1,000s or even $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 is nothing compared to a $500,000 car that'll be worth $1 million later on, and making sure that everything stays perfect. These are no-brainer decisions. And my last and probably most important note on PPF removals is that you should never wait more than 10 years to remove your paint protection film. You should be removing your film, in my opinion, in the 8-year to 9-year mark, or even 7 years is totally fine. If you wait 10 years or longer, like into that 12, 13, 15-year range, you're going to experience lots of issues, and the removal process will cost exponentially more because it's more likely we're going to have really bad problems with adhesive removal, and the film might come off in very small pieces. In this video, you'll see that all the film basically comes off in very large pieces, and that is exactly how we want the film to come off. A lot of people are always interested in what the tools are that I'm using because they want to buy them. So this is a Karcher steamer. It's from Amazon, and if I can find the name, I'll put it in the corner of the video for you. The 458 Speciale had pretty bad swirl marks, but the car is used and it's relatively old, so it wasn't too out of the ordinary for a used car that's actually been driven and I'm sure been washed every now and then. But what we found underneath the paint protection film was unbelievable. I wish I could have gotten my reaction on camera the first time I looked over this stuff with a flashlight after I pulled the PPF off, but I'm pretty sure I can reenact it with this clip. So everything you're seeing on camera here is crazy. I almost don't know how to explain some of it. There are so many different problems. A lot of it's sanding marks, and then there's some just miscellaneous marks that I genuinely don't know how to explain with my detailing knowledge from like a decade's worth of doing this. I don't know how this stuff on the front bumper, for example, happened. It's very, very, very strange. This is some of the weird stuff that comes with the territory of buying a used car with PPF on it. It's like you don't know what's underneath it. So once someone removes it like me, we find out what's underneath it. And what we kind of figure out, in my opinion, is that this is a company that did not do paint correction before the paint protection film. So they just slapped plotter cut film on this car.
Installed.
Then they paint corrected the back half. And that's why the back half that had no PPF on it looked pretty good, just had normal swirl marks for being a car in the world that's been washed and driven. But what we're seeing under the film is just probably, likely, exactly how the car came from Ferrari. And they just clay barred the car and put film over it. I guarantee that makes the paint look worse with the film on top, because we want to just have perfect paint and then put the film on top of that. So unless you send a car to me when it's new, because everyone would know that we would always paint correct a car before putting PPF on it, that you don't really know what you're buying when it's a used car, unless it was potentially a car that I did, then you would know the paint was perfect underneath. But it's kind of like buying a house and pulling the floors up and finding out that it's all rotten underneath. Like, you don't know until you look. This circle mark is really strange, and we literally don't know what that one is. I literally don't know how to explain that one. It was really strange. There's lots of weird sanding marks on the front bumper as well. I think these things are relatively common on brand new Ferraris from what I've seen. And there's also like a dust nib, or maybe that was a rock chip that went through the film. But overall, the film did a really great job protecting this car's paint because everything looks really, really good. And this last shot here are the quarter panels on the 458 that had PPF on it. Once again, clearly not paint corrected. And it also had really bad cut marks on the around the badges where they just had the pressure all wrong and cut the paint. And then in the end here, you'll see this is just a film that came off the 458. So it was all very yellow. This is pretty standard stuff. The 458 Speciale stuff is on the camera now. And this is the 458 PPF, which you can see was also very yellow. This is just natural and happens over time. Paint correcting a Ferrari is complicated. The paint is actually really nice and very high-end paint. The issue is it's kind of missing that last refinement step. And if you don't do that step, then you can't really appreciate how nice the paint is that's hiding underneath a lot of these defects and hazing and sanding marks. For example, a Porsche has a better finishing step or refinement step from the factory, in my opinion, but the actual paint itself is not as nice as the Ferrari paint. It has more orange peel, for example, and overall I think you get more gloss and luster from paint that's on a Ferrari once it's been fully paint corrected, and that's because they've done a little more care and a little more sanding to remove all that orange peel, which ultimately makes the light reflect more, and that is how you end up getting more gloss on a car. To simplify what I'm saying, a brand new Porsche will have better appearing paint than a brand new Ferrari, but a brand new Ferrari that's been paint corrected will have better paint than a paint corrected Porsche. And I hope that makes sense. After you go through the very long process of paint correcting a car like this, you will extract all of that gloss, but it is going to be a complicated process because Ferrari paint is very soft, but it's also very thin. Being a paint correction specialist is a lot like being a magician. After we do our magic,
It's gone.
All jokes aside, we were able to fix the front bumper. All that stuff did come out, and it was pretty bad. I'm not sure what those defects were, how they exactly happened, but they did come out. Unfortunately, our magic did not work on this defect, which was really strange. It's hard to understand how something like this happens. It's possible the bumper was repainted, and this was some kind of weird problem with the painting process, but when you kind of zoom in at it, you can see that there's lots of like spiderweb and cracks in it, and that kind of makes it look like it's older paint, which kind of makes it look like it's more original paint from a long time ago. The majority of my paint correction process on this car was with HDO orange pads and CarPro Reflect. Now, I could have used CarPro Ultra Cut and blue pads on some portions of the car, and I would have been able to do the correction steps quicker. But as I mentioned earlier, when you kind of do that sledgehammer approach, it's very easy and very likely that you'll remove too much paint too quickly, and I want to leave as much paint as I can on this car, especially considering this being a future classic car. This car in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years might need to be paint corrected again, because when you remove the PPF from the car, it is possible you're going to do some swirl marks in the process of removing future adhesive. A good paint correction specialist's job is always to leave the most amount of paint on the car as possible, but also remove as much of the defects as possible. Once the majority of the paint correction process is done, you can go back and do your jeweling steps, which are very slow, very methodical steps, but really don't remove much clear coat. It's a very safe process, and it really extracts that gloss and luster from the paint to make it look dripping wet and incredible. Paint correction on a car like this, for me, is very easy, and it's actually even relaxing. I can practically do it with my eyes closed in kind of a zen state of just knocking out the work, and it's not a big deal. If a person who is not familiar with paint correction, is not very good with paint correction, or just does paint protection film and then tries to paint correct as like a courtesy, you can run into a lot of problems very, very quickly. These are the kinds of cars, as mentioned earlier, that you want someone who has a lot of experience working on it, because if they do have a lot of experience, everything will be an extremely smooth process. Because the customer selected my most advanced paint correction and ceramic coating packages, it included having all of the interior carbon fiber paint corrected. This is something we don't offer on most cars, because simply most cars don't have this level of carbon fiber on the interior. Now, what's interesting is the interior carbon fiber panels are 10 times more delicate than the exterior carbon fiber and generalized clear coated panels on the outside. That's because it's almost like, it seems to me like interior carbon is clear coated as like an afterthought, because the process clearly is not the same, and you can tell that when you see all the defects and things that are in these panels. To make matters worse and more complicated, the interior carbon fiber is extremely thin, like exponentially more thin than the exterior paint on a Ferrari, which already has thin paint in comparison to other cars. This means that we are obviously going to paint correct these panels and improve them, because as you could see, they were so bad. But it's kind of like our sanding analogies. We sand to improve, not to remove. And that is the same mentality that you should keep when you're doing interior carbon fiber panels like this, because it is extremely easy to burn through the paint, and some of the defects will be so bad that they won't be fully correctable, just because this is a different painting process and clear coat process is what you'll see on the exterior of the car. This is when experience comes into play, because many people won't understand or realize this, and they will just keep correcting to fix something that will ultimately guarantee a damaged door panel, and repainting something like this will be complicated and expensive. A lot of people rush to repaint cars when they see a defect in it, and typically that's the right thing to do. You want to repaint a car if there's a problem or a massive paint defect. Now, it gets tricky when you start to talk about really expensive cars. This car is pretty expensive. It's appreciating. These go for anywhere for like $600,000 to $700,000. Super rare, like Apertas and stuff like that, go for like $1 million. So the point is, this car is appreciating. So this car, as we know, is all original paint. Now, if we repaint that front bumper, it's not going to be original. There could be color match issues. There could just be issues all over the place. Now, a really great body shop's going to make it work, and that's perfect. But a guy like me is in a spot of repaint. So this car is not painted. It's all original paint. It has all the factory defects that a Ferrari has. We're going to fix all those, but something like this by a Ferrari person, and most Ferrari people are kind of in the know, and they buy a car that's $600,000 or $700,000, will get like a PPI, or might have a guy like me look at it, and at this stage can look at it and tell you that this is a Ferrari. It might have something like that in it. So it's really not going to impact the value when this car is sold. And it's not necessarily going to impact it if it's sold with a repainted bumper, but there's something about, 50 years from now preserving a car and saying, yep, that's original. We know that, because sometimes these cars have imperfections like that in it. So sometimes you don't want to repaint something because it's not really necessary, and like that's part of the story of that car, and you don't really want to mess with original stuff on cars that are appreciating in value. Now on cars that are depreciating in value, typically it's a no-brainer to repaint something because it might make you feel better about owning that car, and when you go to sell it, it's like, hey, it's in perfect condition. On a depreciating car, selling a car with a bunch of defects in it is not as good. Selling a car that's appreciating with defects that you know are part of the story, part of the car, part of the manufacturing process in Italy is a totally different conversation. Lots of different cars have this. Certain Lotuses have defects like that. We know the Sport Classic 911, the 992 Sport Classic has pitting defects, like all of them in the stripe sections. Like some cars have that. So it's really important to understand the difference between like when to and when to not repaint something. Also, super important to understand that the owner of this car can change his mind at any point. If he wants to repaint it in 2 years, he can. And if he wants to leave it alone forever, he can. You always have the option. It's not even my opinion. We both came to the conclusion that this car should probably just be left alone for now, especially because the PPF kind of fills it in, like you can't really see it when the film was on it. And this customer had this car, I think, for a couple weeks or maybe a month before it came to me, and he didn't even notice it. So especially in a situation like where you're not even noticing it, I wouldn't mess with original paint when it's on there. Also, we tugged that paint protection film off there, which is a really violent act to pull film off, and it didn't pull the paint off. So the paint in that area is pretty strong, and it's pretty robust, and it's intact. So, and the clear is strong and stuff. So, if there was a serious problem there, or we had to address something or definitely repaint it, it would have ripped the paint off when we pulled the film off. So it's important to understand that like the paint in that area is structurally sound. It's a great note to always send your car with a battery tender. If you have one, like send it to me because I'll plug it in. We do a lot of opening and closing doors, especially when we're doing paint protection film. We'll leave doors open so we can let the film dry. It's very rare that a battery dies, but it's possible. So especially on some of these cars, they like kind of drain batteries quickly. So if you have a battery tender, bring it with you if you're local. If you're shipping in from out of state, just throw it in the passenger seat, in the front, the trunk, whatever. This is a great example. Both these cars are on tenders, especially because the 458 over there is going to be sitting for a week before I even get to it. So it's on a tender. So we want to make sure that your guys' cars are in the best shape possible, and if you send a tender, sometimes they're very specific because some of these cars have lithium batteries, so I leave that in your capable hands. Just get the right tenders and give them to me so I can use them when the car is here. After doing an intense paint correction to the magnitude that we had to on this car due to how bad the defects were, it's always going to result in large amounts of polishing dust. This is normal and to be expected, but it's also a nightmare considering you're about to do paint protection film and that one speck of dust can completely ruin an installation. So we do have to wash the car in a moment to make sure we get all of the dust off of the car. Dust aside, we did achieve our goal of perfect paint and an incredible dripping wet gloss appearance that we can now lock in with our paint protection film and ceramic coatings. This car sounds absolutely incredible, and this doesn't even come close to doing it justice, but I hope it was better than nothing. Apparently when people see us pulling the cars outside to wash them,
Well, then everyone loses their minds.
I think this is super funny, and mostly because I don't think most people are aware that lots of shops do this. This is a pretty common thing within the automotive detailing industry. Washing cars outside is kind of a nice experience, but more importantly than that, it keeps all the dirt outside. When I build my crazy like $1 million shop that's going to be the Status Detail HQ, I will obviously build it with a very nice indoor wash bay, but I'm also going to build that place to have an outdoor wash bay that's probably covered just for convenience, because when I wash cars that are especially very dirty, I'm going to want to do that outside. I want to keep as much of that dirt outside as possible. When cars aren't that dirty or they're just doing really basic light maintenance cleanings and things like that, I would obviously wash them inside, or if the weather was extreme like hot or cold, inside. But washing a car outside will never really change for Status Detail as a company when the conditions are right and we have the spot to do it in. I mentioned in the GTR video that gloss black wheels are never a great idea because they'll always swirl mark and look terrible, so I was really happy to see that this car had matte black wheels on it. For the most part, matte black is just really difficult to scratch and swirl mark, so long term these are going to look brand new basically all the time. It's also really nice that carbon ceramic brakes don't dust much, which means they don't build up much contamination or iron like steel brake cars do. If you're interested in any of the products I'm using, just head over to statusdetailstore.com. That has everything you need to wash a car including all the wheel cleaners that I used in this video. For my final decon wash here, to make sure everything is super perfectly clean, I use an extremely strong concentration of soap. It's like almost all soap in the foam cannon, and then I put a little bit of hot water in there, and in this case I'm actually using hot water because it was wintertime and snowing outside. But I spray that on there and just really leave it on for a really, really long time. When the weather is a little colder like it was in this scenario, I can let it dwell even longer and I don't risk any weird stuff happening where it can dry out. You got to be careful about that when it's like 80 degrees or 90 degrees out. But we really just want to let that soap kind of emulsify all that dust and all that finalized dust and dirt on the car and pull it off. Then you're just going to rinse the car like there's no tomorrow. Especially, once again, when it's cold like this, you have no risk of water spots. So another reason I love washing cars when it's kind of cold outside and being outside, because if it's like 30 degrees or 40 degrees or 50 degrees, it's almost impossible to water spot a car, especially if the sun's not out. You could basically leave the water on the car for like an hour and it wouldn't water spot it. I'm not recommending you do that. I'm just saying this is a very, very safe way to wash a car. Now, it's interesting, on the 458 Speciale, there's lots of weird vents and stuff all over the place, and lots of soap suds want to hang out in there. So you got to be careful about this stuff on exotic cars, because you really have to put a stream of water in there and really just kind of rinse it all out. Once I have the car back inside, I blow dry everything to about 99% no water on the car. And then the last 1% I'm going to go back over with a towel and Geom Prep, just to make sure I got everything off and that I didn't miss anything and that no potential dust from outside that you people are so scared of might still be on the car. What you don't realize, and we'll talk more about in a second, is each panel individually gets prepped again like 1 or 2 times before the film goes on it, but we'll talk about that later. A really important note is cars with engine bays like this need to be fully dried, especially if it's hot outside or the car was driven and was hot. Like the engine, these areas water spot really fast, so you need to dry these very quickly and very efficiently so you don't risk getting water spots. The main reason that people ship cars across the country to Status Detail is because they want us to do the paint protection film. PPF is very hard to do, especially when you're doing rare cars like this that are really quite complicated installation cars. I'm going to show you as best I can all the crazy stuff we did to make this car look way better than all the other 458 Speciales out there, because we did very unique installation techniques on many different areas. Take the door, for example. Most people will either remove the mirrors from the car completely to put them on so there's no seam on the upper part of the door. Some people do a vertical seam, which looks pretty terrible on a car like a Ferrari because the mirrors are so low on the door that you end up with a massive seam. Now, on some cars you can pull this off because that gap between the mirror and the window is very small, but that's not the case here. This technique that you're about to see is called the birthing method. And buckle up.
You're gonna see some serious shit.
Basically, we pre-cut a hole on the film so there will be no seam on it. Then we put tons of soap and lubrication on the mirror itself and on the back of the film. And then, as you can see, I'm steaming the film. The reason you use steam is because it really softens up the film itself and makes it more stretchy. Now we're going to pull and force this over, and it kind of looks like... because the film is a little softer and more maneuverable, we can slide and pull this over the mirror. The wives watching the video know exactly why it was called the birthing method. This is a relatively tricky thing to do. The most important thing is that you have to make sure you cut that pre-cut perfectly, because if it's not all nice and like rounded edges, when you try and do that, it will 100% tear through the film. Now, on some cars, this can be a difficult thing to do because sometimes the mirror itself is significantly larger than like the arm that attaches to the car. But on most cars, almost all cars, you will be able to birth the mirror with no problems. The hard part of that is making that pre-cut, because we bulk install, so we hand cut that. And on 911s now, I actually have a template that I made that's for hand cutting out mirrors. So on all 911s now, I do the birthing method, and there will be no seam on any mirror on any 911 door. Once you have this on, the rest of this door is relatively easy. It's pretty straightforward. You just need to squeegee it all out and cut out the door handle, which is a relatively easy thing to do. If the mirror, for example, was on the windshield area of the car, like on that pillar instead of on the door, this door would be pretty easy. But because of the birthing method being so necessary necessary because of how low the mirror is on the door, I would say this is a relatively advanced installation for the door. This is one of the many reasons why you will want a steamer if you do PPF, because this is simply not possible unless you have a steamer. The steam softens the film significantly and does allow you to slip that over. If you tried to do it just at room temperature, it would not work very well. We really go out of our way to try and shove the film underneath all the gaskets and the seams and wrap things into the door jambs. I want the film to be invisible. You should not be able to really tell that there is film on the car, and that is one of the reasons why the berthing method is so important for the doors. I think Status Detail will be known for over time is that I don't get to a point where I install on a car and then go, okay, I'm pretty good. I'm just going to like stop there and install now just like this. Like I'm always pushing to be better. I want to be better than I was yesterday. So I'm going to try things that people say is impossible. When you don't, settle and you constantly want to grow and you constantly want to push the boundaries of what the film can do, you learn a lot of crazy stuff. That's how you get good at doing, 992 fenders without the headlights being pulled out. And that's a really big deal because you read a lot about stories online from installers saying, the car is throwing parking sensor codes now, or it's got this or that problem, and the only way to fix these things are to take them to the dealership. And the last thing you want is your 20-mile car throwing codes because someone pulled the headlights out for no reason, but they thought they had to. I want to teach you guys how to do some of this stuff so we, as a community, can kind of make the film world better because there's way too many bad shops out there doing bad work. So you'll even see when I'm installing the fender on this car, like this looks like a pretty straightforward fender, but you do need to stretch it a little bit. If you don't stretch it, you're going to get what we call fingers, which basically means the film bunches up and it causes a lot of issues and basically makes it impossible to fully install. And because you're seeing we bulk install, I don't do any plotter cut stuff. Once I get the stretch right and everything is set up perfectly, you'll see I cut out the Ferrari badge. When you do plotter cut stuff, it's really easy to sometimes have the film shift the wrong way and then you end up with crazy edges around that badge. What a lot of people would probably do, honestly, if they were plotting this fender, they would just delete the plotter cutout for the Ferrari badge and then they would hand cut it out anyways. So people don't like to talk about that when they say that they plot in a lot of situations, which is why it's best to usually just choose a person who does bulk installs because that's what they're used to. That's also going to mean they're more comfortable cutting. You don't want a person who doesn't ever cut because when they do have to make a cut, which is inevitable, they're pretty likely to cut through the paint, cut through the film into the paint, which happened on the 458 because we already saw that around the Pininfarina badge. They cut the paint really bad. Those cars also had plotter installations, which kind of further solidifies that what I just said is probably relatively accurate. Same thing on this wing in the back here. It kind of just looks like it's easy to install. Like you just lay the film on it, squeegee it down, and it's done. But the reality is even small panels like this are a little bit complicated and you need to stretch them. I would say that this, to a degree, isn't advanced, but it's like not easy. It's not a beginner level thing. Because if you don't stretch the back half of this the right way, you're going to end up with a weird situation where the back part of the wing has a million fingers and doesn't look right. The 458 Speciale hood is hands down one of the more difficult hoods you're going to have to install if you're a paint protection film installer. Now, when the car came in, there were crazy seams that were like 10 inches tall. And that's just a little extreme. Like, they don't need to be that big. That was a very durable installation because there's no way it was going to peel up, and the film was pretty thick. Now, when you stretch film, it does get a little thinner. But again, we want to kind of focus on this car on, like, the aesthetic side a little bit more. This car will be driven, but it won't be driven, like, 10,000 miles a year or anything. On a car like this, you kind of push the envelope for wanting it to be a very aesthetically nice, but also durable. But you want, like, you're leaning into the aesthetic side of the install more than you are the durability side. So we're really going to try and not do any seams at all when we're doing this hood. Now, once again, this is a panel that without steam, there's no hope. There's no way you're going to get this fully installed the way we did without steam. It's just not going to happen. Now, what we realize is as you're pushing the envelope here, you're squeegeeing down further and further and further, and you get to a point where you feel a lot of tension in the film. And when you start to realize, and when you've been doing this long enough, you're going to realize you reach a point where there's so much tension, you just know it's not going down, and if you do get it down, it's going to pop up. So we had to do a seam here, and you could see real briefly on screen there how big that seam was. It's only maybe 2.5 inches, so it's like 75-80% smaller of a seam the way it came in, which I'd say is a pretty big difference. It's important to note that when you're doing something like this, the more the film bounces back as we're trying to do this, the more you get adhesive lines. So there are some minimal adhesive lines in the front part of this hood, but every installer and customer of a car like this will always agree adhesive lines are always better than like 12-inch long, foot-long seams, because seams can be seen forever. They're always visible. Stretch lines are not visible in the sun if they're not very bad, which they're not bad on this car. You will see stretch lines under the lights I have in the shop. I don't like seeing them. We shoot for 0 on every car, but when you're doing a panel this complicated, the likelihood is you're going to have some stretch lines. Like, that's just normal, but you can mitigate it and keep it at a reasonable level if you're, using the film correctly and playing with the film correctly and keeping tack out as much as possible until it's absolutely necessary. Paul has been installing PPF for a very long time, and at this point I am kind of way deep down the rabbit hole of advanced stuff. So between the both of us doing this, we got it down. But this is something that if you're trying this for the first time or you're new to PPF and you're doing this, like, you need to go into this fully understanding that you might waste the first panel or two of PPF because you're probably going to ruin it. We did it on the first try, but as you saw, it was a fight. It took a couple tries to get the hood to stay down and get the relief cuts right, because when you're bulking, you're trimming out small amounts at a time until you finally get it perfect. But there's no shame in trying what we're doing in this video for the first time on a car in your shop and like just realizing you have to do it a second time. So kind of learn the film and the panel on the first installation, and if you get it, terrific. And if not, just understand that this was kind of a test run. So when you do your second hood, that you know exactly how to do it, what the limitation is, and like where you're going to do the relief cut, and then your second hood's just going to go down smoother. But a lot of shops can't do that because the margins aren't very good, depending on what your market is, and film is expensive. So it's a tricky thing. But again, this is why you send a car to status detail, because between the both of us, Paul and I, like we got this down without a problem, but it was a fight. I would definitely say this is one of the more difficult hoods you're going to do on a car in the PPF world. So the roof is a pretty hard panel as well, and it's mainly because it's so like basketball shaped. The length and the size of this 458 roof is just so big that it becomes complicated. So this is a really easy panel to get an accidental large amount of stretch lines on, and it's also one of those things that once you put this down, if there's dust in the middle of the roof, you're just kind of screwed. You either have to decide to redo it or leave it, depending on how bad that dust is. We were able to do it with none because we were able to just do the crazy prep process that we do on every panel, and there was none. But a lot of that's going to come down to luck. If you get lucky and there's no dust in it, the rest of it's going to be in stretching like the window pillars and stuff like that, because you have to do that relatively quickly. If you do it too slowly, the longer you wait, the more the glue attaches at the top, and then when you do the stretch, you're going to get a line. So you have to work relatively quickly. These are the panels that's very, very nice to have two people working on it. And continuing the trend of difficult installations, the quarter panels are pretty hard on this car. They're not like world-endingly difficult or anything. Anytime you're dealing with something that's got that big of a dip in it, it's going to be a little complicated because you will have to stretch this a certain way to make this go down. Now, if there was no wing in the back, I could stretch it like beyond that point and it would be pretty easy. But because the wing is there, I can't really stretch. So you end up having to tack the back half and then kind of pulling it forward. And again, when you do something like that, you can get stretch lines. So you have to kind of do it perfectly and kind of more or less do it on the first try, because if you end up going back multiple times, you're going to get pretty bad adhesive lines. And once again, here you're going to see I'm installing here, and then you're going to see Paul installing on the car too. So it's really great having two people, because doing PPF is a lot of work. After you've been doing PPF for 3, 4, 5 days in a row on a difficult car and holding crazy yoga poses like this, your body starts to let you know that you need a break. Your whole body hurts. You spend a lot of time bending over. Some of the car's bumpers and things like that are more complicated than others. So you can spend an easy 5-6 hours a day just on a bumper if it's really complicated, like a C8 bumper, for example. So PPF beats you up, man. It's hard on your body. It's physical. It's mental. In other videos coming up soon, you'll probably see me talk more about this, but I actually did hire the first employee, and he is currently part-time, but he has prior experience doing paint protection film. He'll probably be in videos in the future. So far, he's helped me with 2 cars, and he's been super awesome. I still do the majority of the work on the cars, but he definitely helps me do the prep work. He helps me lay stuff out, squeegee stuff. I'm currently doing all the cutting on the cars. But again, having that relief, having that person to help go through the day, we've been getting through cars very efficiently. At the end of the day, I don't want to crawl to bed like this. So that's been a wonderful addition to the kind of the status detail team. And that's just a small update just on the company's growth, which is a cool thing to share with you guys. It's always relatively obvious when people who had no idea what they were doing worked on a car before you. And for example, one of those things is like when you see large amounts of what appears to me to be compound on a rubber seal that's like in the door jamb, which means someone was like paint correcting this with the door open. I don't know what's going on here, but this isn't exactly good looking. It's unfortunately pretty badly stained, so we have to use Q2 tire or Pearl, either one works, and I have to work a large amount of this into here. Basically, I scrubbed this off with cleaner first, but then after that was done, I went back in and I tried to kind of re-dye it almost, or restain it with something that would kind of restore the rubber appearance. But it's also important that you don't want this stuff to dry out, so this is actually like diluting Pearl into water is a great way to restore this kind of stuff, because it kind of rehydrates it and makes it so it doesn't dry out, because if it dry out and crack, that's a big problem, then you have to replace it. This car is used, it has miles on it, and it's kind of old, so it really did need the process of an interior cleaning. Fair to say that, you know, the inside of this car never really got a status detail level leather cleaning. So it was nice to get in here and really clean all this stuff up, and because the car came in really good starting condition, by the time I was done with it, I swear this thing looked brand new on the inside. So we're really going to re-deliver this to the customer brand spanking new looking, or better than brand spanking new. So you just gotta clean everything, and that means the leather and all that needs to be clean. The average person might have looked at the interior of this car and said, yeah, it looks pretty good. Like, I don't think we gotta clean it. But the status detail customer understands that, you know, there's the 5% of oil and dirt and shininess on this steering wheel, and that we can make it better. We can really clean it up and make it look brand new. So when you get the keys back, you feel like this is your car, not someone else's car. And that's a special feeling, you know, when you buy a used car. The main products I'm using here, again, if you want to buy them from statusdetailstore.com, is Geon Leather Cleaner Mild. Now you're going to get confused here because they just changed the name and the label to Geon Leather Cleaner Natural. I do not know why they did that. It's very confusing. Geon Leather Cleaner Natural and Geon Leather Cleaner Mild are the exact same product. So I have not updated that on the website. I will do my best to do it soon, but it might take me a while. But just know those are the same products. If you go on my store and buy Geon Leather Cleaner Mild, you will get delivered Geon Leather Cleaner Natural. The Geon Leather Cleaner brush and the Detail Factory brush are both used in this video. The leather brush is a little stronger, a little more deeper of a cleaning. The Detail Factory brush is also very good, but it's a little lighter of a clean, and it gets into the nooks and crannies, things like that a little better. Things like the bolsters are really important to keep clean, because as dirt gets into this stuff and it kind of dries, it really begins to actually kind of dry the leather out. And if you're not careful long term, that is why these things tend to wear very badly and they begin to crack and fray and all that stuff, because that dirt is kind of acting like sandpaper and kind of grinding into the leather grain every time you're getting in and out. So it's very, very important to keep these things clean. I haven't showed you guys the ceramic step, or at least an in-depth look at the ceramic step in a lot of my past videos, because at the end of the process of working on a car for 8, 9, 10 days, we're just usually so tired and worn out that I just don't have the time or energy to actually film this part of the detail, so we usually steamroll through it, get it done, finish the car, and deliver it. But in this video, I really wanted to go the extra mile and do my best to show as many steps as possible. You might notice in this video on this car, I'm using a different applicator than I have in the past. This is an applicator from a company called Auto Fiber, and it's basically a big piece of foam with a microfiber wrapped around it, but inside the casing underneath the microfiber is like this material that basically makes it so the foam inside won't absorb any of the ceramic, so the ceramic stays in the top part of the microfiber. Otherwise, we would lose a lot of the ceramic product in the sponge part itself. I really like it because you end up putting on a little extra ceramic, like you do a little bit of a heavier or thicker installation with this process and with this block. But I also really like it because it contours to things, and this hood is a great example, and really this entire car is a great example, because there's so many interesting lines and curves to it that with the traditional Geon block, it would be relatively tedious and hard, and you might even end up missing some spots because the block is so rigid, whereas this flexes and conforms to everything, really making sure that you just get a perfect installation. But like I mentioned a second ago, it's really important to note that you end up putting a thicker, heavier application down, and in my high-end packages, I end up actually doing multiple coats per base coat and top coat. So you're actually getting a stronger, better ceramic coating, which is pretty cool, especially considering I didn't raise the prices or anything when I changed this process. In my opinion, I'm just giving you a better ceramic coating application now. It's really important to ceramic coat the PPF as well. Even though there's that base of ceramic built into the PPF, the Stek PPF, we never want to rely on that, and real ceramic coatings are just real, right? So we want to put the real stuff on top of the PPF. The PPF is designed to protect the paint. The ceramic is designed to keep it cleaner longer, make it easy to clean, and add that extra pop of gloss among some other cool attributes that it adds to the car. Many people don't fully understand as well that PPF is porous, and we have proof of that when we have an accidental water bubble sometimes stuck behind in the film. That will air out through the film and evaporate and disappear completely. But that also means that the inverse can happen, where if something like a bird poop gets on it and sits too long, it can actually etch through the film sometimes and still damage the paint underneath. In my opinion, ceramic coating will actually help deter this from happening, because it kind of seals in your PPF and kind of prevents that from happening. But again, the main reason is because we want more gloss, easier to clean, and faster to clean, and stays cleaner longer. Anyone who's interested in ceramic coating their own car, it's relatively approachable if you follow all the steps pretty perfectly. I recommend checking out some of my videos on this. My best recommendation is to work slowly and methodically. Don't work too big of a panel. On large hoods, you split it into 2 at least, maybe even 3 or 4 sometimes. On smaller hoods, you can just do it all in one shot. And if you're interested in any of this stuff, just check out statusdetailstore.com and go to the ceramic coating page. Our pickup day in Chicago was quite cold on this particular day, and as you can see in the background, there was quite a bit of snow, but the streets were clean and everything was good to go. The cars were finished and they were ready to be loaded up and sent back down to Florida. This was easily one of my favorite details that I've done recently. When a customer calls me up and basically gives me the open checkbook approach to doing a car, selecting the most expensive packages and saying, do it exactly how you would do it, Evan, because I really don't want any stone unturned. That's when I'm kind of at my best and I have the ability to show you everything that I can do and everything that I've learned, and I can apply that to your car. Also, the element of this car coming in with prior paint protection film and all of the problems that were underneath really gave us a lot to dive into and just a lot to discover and fix, which I think ultimately made this a very interesting and fun video to watch. If you're new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing, as I have a lot more videos very similar to this one coming out soon. I have a GT3 RS and a Sport Classic video, among a bunch of other cool Porsche content that's coming soon. If you're interested in sending a car to me, just head over to statusdetail.com and hit the Contact Us page and use whatever contact method is most convenient for you. And if you're hungry for more Status Detail content, head over to Instagram, as I post on Instagram with stories almost every single day. I know what you're thinking. They might ban you from buying a new Ferrari after they see this video.
But they'll never take our freedom!
Because I'll just buy a used Pista. That's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video very soon.